Since the collapse of communism in 1989, the demand for self-governance spread rapidly. Democracy became the dominant framework for nations trying to rebuild. This demand is clear in the massive Arab Spring protests of 2010. Millions of citizens took to the streets demanding an end to autocratic regimes. Across North Africa and the Middle East, protesters forced out longtime dictators, pushing for fair, open elections that had been denied to them for decades. But the aftermath was chaotic. While some countries managed to hold free elections, others immediately faced military overthrows and struggled to keep their democratic changes intact. Removing a dictator is just the first step. The actual survival of a new government depends entirely on the specific mechanical operating system a country chooses to install afterward. We tend to use the word democracy as if it's a single, uniform product, but no two democracies work in the exact same way. Every government faces the exact same structural dilemma. They have to balance the sheer efficiency of getting things done against the friction required to keep that state power in check. To solve this, nations generally rely on three main frameworks: parliamentary, presidential, and authoritarian models. If we strip away the political theater and look at the actual mechanics of these systems, we can evaluate the exact trade-offs required to operate global power. Let's start with the most common democratic framework, the parliamentary system. Here, the voters elect a single assembly, which holds both the executive and legislative power. The public doesn't directly vote for their leader. Instead, the majority party within that elected assembly chooses the prime minister. Because the prime minister and legislature are on the same team, with no executive veto, laws can be passed incredibly fast. The foundational model for this is Great Britain. The real engine of their system is the House of Commons, where directly elected members of Parliament make the critical legislative decisions. They share power with the appointed House of Lords, but if the Lords try to vote down a bill, the House of Commons has the authority to override them and push the legislation through. The catch is accountability. If the legislature decides the prime minister is failing, they can hold a no-confidence vote. This instantly dissolves the government and triggers new elections. The structural trade-off is clear. You gain extreme legislative agility and rapid responsiveness, but you sacrifice long-term predictability and the ability to directly elect your executive. The presidential system takes the opposite approach, relying on a strict separation of executive, legislative, and judicial powers into distinct branches. The executive is insulated from the legislature, holding a direct mandate from the voters for a fixed, guaranteed term. You can see this strict separation in Mexico, where a dominant, directly elected president leads the executive branch alongside a separate two-chamber legislature. Some countries use a hybrid approach. In France's semi-presidential system, a powerful president handles high-level affairs, but appoints a premier to manage daily government functions alongside the legislature. By dividing authority, this system creates deep structural stability. The barriers are intentionally high, making it extremely difficult for any single branch to seize total control of the state. But that stability comes at a cost. The intentional friction between these branches frequently creates severe legislative gridlock, and getting rid of an ineffective leader before their fixed term expires is mechanically very difficult. If we want to see the absolute extreme of state efficiency, we have to look at authoritarian models. In systems like China, the central government controls major industries and policy decisions, enforcing strict censorship to actively suppress critical feedback from the public. A state operating without checks can execute decisions instantly, but the cost of that speed is severe. In North Korea, total centralization has resulted in devastating mass poverty and the complete erasure of human liberty. Theocracies follow a similar structural logic. In an Islamic republic like Iran, the ultimate check on power isn't a directly elected assembly, but religious law interpreted by a supreme leader. These control models achieve total ideological unity and state agility by intentionally eliminating the friction of checks and balances. They prove that absolute efficiency requires absolute subjugation of the individual. This brings us to the fundamental rule of governance. It is impossible to maximize both state efficiency and checks on power at the same time. This quadrant chart plots how these systems compare directly against one another, measuring legislative agility against the strength of checks on power. The parliamentary system sits high on agility in the top left, prioritizing the speed of policy implementation over complex blocking mechanisms. The presidential system sits in the opposite corner. It deliberately sacrifices legislative speed, using gridlock as a tool to prevent tyranny. And authoritarianism pushes the limits entirely, achieving maximum agility by operating with near-zero checks on state power. There is no utopian solution here. Choosing a political framework is an exercise in deciding which specific structural risks a society is willing to tolerate. We can see the real-world stakes of these choices when emerging nations attempt to build new democracies from scratch. Political scientists often note that these new democracies tend to survive longer when they adopt parliamentary systems. The reason is mechanical. If a leader is failing, the no-confidence vote gives the assembly a legal, immediate release valve to remove them, which drastically reduces the motivation for a military coup. You can see this resilience at work in Ghana. After decades of instability, they adopted a new constitution in 1992 and have since established a track record of peaceful, democratically elected transfers of power. In contrast, the rigid, fixed terms of a newly built presidential system can crack under pressure. If an ineffective executive outright refuses to leave their office, the entire structure is at extreme risk of breaking. The mechanical framework a country chooses dictates exactly how power flows through the government, but a system is only as strong as its inputs. Ultimately, the survival of any democracy relies entirely on clear election transparency, a free press,